So I will point out California spent close to $14 billion on a high-speed rail system, which will probably never be completed. They spend billions on illegal immigrants, offering themselves as a sanctuary state, sanctuary city. Again, these are just the realities we need to face when we're asking Ohio or Florida or Wisconsin taxpayers to, again, pay for their grotesque incompetence and mismanagement and poor governance. So appreciate the points you made. As I toured the Palisades with Senator Scott and others, what struck me is, I mean, there were homes that were still standing. There were structures still standing. And I know part of that is just sort of the luck of the draw. But when you're watching things on TV, you just see these huge walls of fire. And you just kind of assume it's just massive wall of fire, just consuming everything in its wake. And in some areas that happens. But it was, as it was described to me, is what happens with these high winds. It'll take different types of vegetation off a palm tree and fling that in the air. And then that goes into the vents of homes. And that's what really starts this. So that if you actually have the reservoirs filled, if you had trucks pre-positioned, we were told the trucks were all down the beach. And yet, as you tour Pacific Palisades, kind of like right in the middle, there's this, I don't know, probably like 4-lane, very large boulevard. Had they had fire trucks pre-positioned and water available, so much of the destruction, the physical destruction, could have been prevented. And that's saying nothing of the fact that they would have actually extinguished the Lockman fire. So, I mean, am I describing that right in terms of how these fires just keep perpetuating themselves? It's just not. In some cases, it is a massive wall of fire, but it's just what's being, set in the winds and then going into vents, that type of thing.
So typically, let's talk about this. You're talking about fire behavior is what you're talking about. And so what happens is that depending on the wind of it, we have a fire prediction modeling system that will tell us what the fire behavior forecast will look like. And part of that is what you're called spotting. And that means where you're taking a piece of a house or a tree or bark, and it can blow. Sometimes it can blow as far as two miles downwind spotting. And those are starting other additional fires, and eventually, things start to merge. And so when a wind-driven fire gets out of control, it's difficult to stop. So the concept is, and like in Los Angeles, is what we call the hit it hard, hit it fast concept. Cal Fire also has a thing called the 90-10 rule, which is 90% of the fires to 10 acres or less. That's the typical standard that you try to have. And so part of this is aggressive pre-positioning. Part of this is aggressive and offensive-minded conversations, with these conference calls. But also it should result in the decision-making that your posture should look common across all agencies. You should have a common operating picture. And part of that common operating picture is getting those reservoirs, understanding what's online and what's offline, so you have contingency plans to implement in event something is faulty.
So, one of the questions asked us is, why aren't you concentrating on the Eaton Canyon fire? And I mean, Palisades, 12 deaths, 7,000 buildings, about 23,000 acres. The Eaton Canyon was 19 deaths, 9,000 buildings, about 14,000 acres. As I've read reports, it sounds like that might have been started by electrical wires, which again, mitigation efforts, get those things underground. Again, they spend $14 billion in high-speed rail and they don't try and eliminate that threat of electrical fire. Why is there so much emphasis on Palisades versus Eaton? I'll start with you, Chief Butler.
My experience is just strictly focused on the Palisades incident, and that was kind of where my expertise came from. Frankly, I don't have any background on the Eaton fire. I didn't respond to it. And so I think it's important that all the fires get the attention. But for me personally, I really focused on what folks did or didn't do before the wind came.
But was it because you had the Lockman fire in the Palisades that could have been extinguished, might have prevented the whole thing, versus maybe electrical fire in Eaton Canyon? Mr. Chief Crawford, can you answer that? So it just puzzles me.
So it's truly understand it is there's a domino effect that took place here. So the lack of staffing properly led to a large resource request onto the Palisades fire, which had a cascading effect to the agencies next to Los Angeles County Fire and other agencies, and they sent resources to assist the Palisades. So now you have other areas of the county that's resource light. And so when the Eaton Canyon fire happened later that evening, you had a ton of resources over at the Palisades. Proper staffing and pre-positioning eliminates having the need to request mutual aid, as quick as they did in the Palisades. So the response times to the Eaton Canyon fire, if you look at even all of the TV reports and the video footage, it took a very long time for them to get resources just on scene of that fire to begin with, which allowed that fire to expand.
Is it fair to say the failure, which led to the Palisades fire growing out of control, then contributed to the Eaton Canyon fire growing out of control? So this, again, the same people responsible for Palisades, there's a relationship there as well.
Although the two fires are very, far apart by mileage, but they're very interconnected with the amount of resources that was put on the Palisades from outside of the LAFD. And then in the resource request that you take that, that went even further than Los Angeles, it takes a long time to get those resources on the road and, and moving down towards Los Angeles, which goes back to the pre-incident conversations that when you have to circle back to. That's really where the crux of all this really lies, is those pre-incident conversations and the decisions that were not made, that did not reach the level and the speed of conditions.
But kind of getting back to my initial question in terms of pre-position, if you hadn't contained it a lot earlier, if you would have had the reservoirs filled, if you would have had fire trucks not on the beach but up there, could have you prevented some of the loss of life? Still would have been a pretty big disaster, but could that help mitigate the extent of the damage, Chief Butler?
The reason we pre-deploy is for that precisely, because forget about having a Lockman fire there. It's the weather events there, the winds come in fire weather. I've seen it before. We flood the areas, and when I've had fires, the job is to see if we can contain it and keep it in an area at least we can manage it. We're not going to put out a wind-driven fire. To the point of the Eaton fire, I do believe, because the county fire chief put a lot of resources in pre-deployment in his own department. In fact, he pre-deployed resources to Catalina Island because of the threat. But when Los Angeles didn't pre-deploy and needed resources, the city, not me, the city had to draw off what the county had already done to prepare for themselves. And so there was a cascading effect of one agency not pre-deploying and 5 other agencies having to fill in the gap.
Okay.